Hello, this is the lecture video for Zastrow modules 1 and 2. So I lumped both of these together, but we're going to start with module 1 first, which is rational therapy, and then module 2 is behavioral therapy, but we'll cover both. So rational therapy, module 1. The founder was Albert Ellis, and it is also referred to as RET, which is rational emotive therapy. Primary focus for this therapy is to challenge and change irrational beliefs. And the impact of this therapy is enormous. It's used in every aspect of human services. So all feelings and actions occur according to this format. So this is very important. So the first thing that happens is an event. The next thing that happens is self-talk. So we have event, self-talk. Self-talk is what we tell ourselves about what is actually happening. It is our interpretation of the event that has happened. It is the primary cause of all of our emotions and actions that are associated with this event. Most people believe that our actions and emotions are because of the event. So next we have emotion. What emotion are we associating with the event? And then actions. What actions did we take based off of the emotions and the self-talk that we've already identified to the event that has happened? So although we hold thousands of beliefs, attitudes, and values, our self-talk at a given time is based only on a fraction of them. So remember, if you could think of a situation that may have happened in your own life, you're thinking in a split second, okay, what's the self-talk that I'm giving myself if, say, for example, a drastic one, a car accident happens. What's that initial thought that you're giving yourself with that? So that's your initial self-talk. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative event too. It could be a positive event, but sometimes we only focus on the negative because honestly, that's what our clients are going to be coming in with and we're going to be focusing on with them. Rational thinking or self-talk is based on objective reality. So it's based on facts, not feelings. Feelings come after. And it helps us to protect our lives, achieve our goals more quickly, avoid trouble with others, and feel the emotions that we want to feel. We can't control events that happen. We can control how we respond to events. I used to tell my kids back when I was working in the juvenile, detention facility, that we can't control how others react to situations, but we can control how we respond to them. So we don't want to react, we want to respond to a situation. And that's based on our thoughts about the event or about the situation. And therapy is therefore an educational process. There is an exercise on page 414, and I definitely encourage you to do this activity. I feel that, that might be a good exercise for you to look at or review. The box on page 415, there was a guy that comes home and he sees his wife and his friend embracing. So what would you think if you kind of came home and you saw that? The guy assumes what? That there's an affair going on. So he's raged, angry, wants to fight the guy. But what actually was going on was that they were rehearsing for a play. So I want you to take a moment, or you could do this after, but I want you to think about this and do an exercise on your own. So I want you to identify an unpleasant emotion that you recently experienced. Describe what happened around this. How did it happen? And what was your self-talk in that situation? If your self-talk had been different, would your emotions have been different? And also take that a step further and think, would your actions have been different in that situation? We are obviously doing this virtually, so we can't really discuss this as a class, but I really want you to kind of think about that because I think it will help you put yourself into a client's perspective if you plan on using this type of therapy when you're working with them. Something else that happens in this type of therapy is layering, and that is the emotional reaction becomes a new event. So think about, if an event happens and you have your self-talk and you now have your emotional reaction. If it's a negative emotional reaction, that could become a whole new event for a person. So say, for example, they are thinking, I screwed up. I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot to get so upset about how I screwed up. I must be even more of an idiot than I thought. So it's like a train of events. We talked about that snowball effect, and that's kind of what that would be. That would be your layering that could happen. It could signal a whole new event that could, kind of send your client in a downward spiral. We can deepen this by adding other events, bad things that happened in our life to the mix, and then we feel even worse. So we could think back about other bad events that have happened and add that into it. My boyfriend left me. I must not be very desirable. Yeah, and the one before me left then too. And I must be even less desirable than I originally thought. So again, snowball, trickle effect is happening. There are 5 ways to change unwanted emotions. First is getting involved in a meaningful or distracting activity, escape. There's an exercise on page 418 at the top that references this. The second would be to change the negative or irrational thinking underlying that emotion. So you want to change your self-talk using rational self-analysis. There's an exercise on page 419 on the bottom. This requires self-challenges when you experience unwanted emotions. The example of Cindy and Jim after his admitting that he had sex with Linda during their break in their relationship on pages 420 to 421. Third, we want to change the distressing event. There's an exercise on page 422 about this. By changing your self-talk about it, you're changing that distressing event. 4, use of drugs, alcohol, and food. It is true that only provides temporary relief. And then 5 is a very unwanted action would be suicide. So those are 5 ways that a person can change the unwanted emotion. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're all good ways on changing them either. But because obviously using drugs or alcohol or using food to cope is not positive, and choosing suicide is not a positive way to cope either. But, I refer to those as coping mechanisms rather than coping skills. This type of therapy can be useful with mandatory clients because it can help them look at their self-talk prior to and during their offense. So we could look to see what is it that they're telling themselves that might be encouraging this behavior to keep happening. Again, coping mechanism. Another example would be a date rape. Think about what a date rape is. A guy's thoughts might be, well, we've hung out 3 times. She came over to my place. It's time for her to reciprocate. She wants it as much as I do. If she says don't, she really means don't stop. And when it's over, she'll really love me. So, clients learn to analyze and change their self-talk by therapist instruction. They could change it by viewing videos or films on how to do it, reading books and handouts that you might be able to give them, or attending workshops or seminars. And the therapist may disclose their own self-talk experience in case clients have the irrational belief that their therapists are not human. We talked a little bit about self-disclosure as far as, INSU, how that works in what their beliefs are on self-disclosing, but this is just another perspective on self-disclosing in therapy. Sometimes with this particular therapy, homework assignments are often given using rational self-analysis. So the steps for which are on page 418 if you would like to reference that, if this is something you would like to continue with or use in your own practice. And evaluation, many outcome studies demonstrating effectiveness. So often more than some other methods of therapy that you might use. So it is demonstrating effectiveness in working with clients. Module 2, behavior therapy. All right, based on the work of Pavlov, Skinner, Bandura, Wolpe, there's a lot of, theorists out there that kind of had work with behavior therapy. The main concept is the behavior is the problem and it's not the symptom. So you test what you do and you establish a baseline for your behavior. A quick review of these basic principles. We have operant conditioning, which has a behavior and a stimulus. You have a positive reinforcer and the behavior increases. If you have a negative reinforcer, the behavior increases once the negative stimulus stops. It feels so good when it stops, and it's like a seatbelt alarm. It keeps dinging, dinging, dinging. When it stops, it's like, oh, finally stopped. And the third one would be punishment in operant conditioning. This is a behavior that is avoided once it is applied. It's contaminated by fear, and it's not necessarily permanent. Respondent conditioning is Pavlovian. A pair a behavior with another behavior or event. So, Pavlov used the ringing of the bell with the food. The dog salivated without the food. They salivated by the bell. Ring the bell enough without the food, you're counter conditioning, you're pairing a stimulus incompatible with the target behavior. So that is another example. Modeling. Modeling is observing a behavior and imitating a behavior. So our behavior is cold and calculating. At the bottom of page 387, it says that they're actually warmth, positive regard for client, the same as any other therapist that you're working with. Although it may not sound that way, if you're thinking about the examples with the dog and the food, or you're using negative reinforcers or punishment, different things like that. It does sound cold to someone who's just reading through that. But, they actually are known to be higher in empathy and self-congruent. So it's just the same as any other therapist or therapy that you're using. So methods used in behavioral therapy, we kind of talked about the operant conditioning. There's an exercise on page 435, Respondent conditioning, there's an exercise on page 436. And modeling, going back, lost my train of thought here. The respondent conditioning, the exercise on page 436, some examples would be with drug addicts using covert sensitization or use of desensitization might be a way that you could do that as well. Modeling is used in assertiveness training and socialization training. So, if you demonstrate a behavior, then they would model that behavior. Assertiveness training is not aggressiveness training. It's the different communication styles. Very important. You want to use this work when you're doing behavioral therapy because oftentimes they might have more of an aggressive approach, or maybe they're really passive and that's how this behavior happened in the first place. So assertiveness training would be really good for a person in this line of work, because you want to teach them to communicate what they need without being one or the other. There's 12 steps on how to self-facilitate in the text. Assertiveness training can often be done in group training as well. And you can do with clients in individual practice by doing role playing, having them try it on their own and then reporting back to you. Behavior rehearsal is rehearsing with a therapist and trying it in actual life and then reporting back. I've done this a few times in my sessions where I would have them kind of like role play or model the behavior and then have them try it and then let me know how it worked for them. And then with that, you can kind of tweak it if you need to. Like if something didn't work great, well, then you have that ability to work with the therapist or work with the client to kind of fix what needs to be fixed so that it does work. There is a token economy system. It's a symbolic reinforcer for reward or punishment. So maybe you earn so many points for a day. It can be a way to self-monitor also. Contingency contracting. If I do this, then a positive thing may happen, or maybe even an aversive thing may happen, or a punishment. How you will know is the contribution of practitioners. It's kind of like a contract to get your desired behavior. If these are my goals, if I follow this contract, then I might get A, B, or C reward. Or I could get A, B, or C taken away if we're going aversive. We're going to skip over implosive therapy and exposure therapy and aversive therapy. They're not really used too much, so we'll skip over that. The CBT techniques, cognitive behavioral therapy, I mentioned that before. Your thought stopping. So it's kind of interesting when somebody comes in and they kind of have this thought process, it might be like a negative chain of events that happen. And you actually want them to visualize like a stop sign or yell stop to themselves, whether it be out loud or in their head. So your thought stopping, you're stopping that thought before it goes any further, before it hits that snowball effect. So a therapist might start with you first and yell stop, and then, you can slowly progress to do it on your own, and then eventually be able to do it in your mind rather than maybe talking it out loud. Or you could still do it out loud if you wanted to. Diversions. We do this all with toddlers. You kind of divert their attention with different things. Substitute an activity for an undesirable behavior or thoughts. And then you reframe the mind. You reframe the thoughts. You're changing the thoughts. The book identifies 6 For example, positive thinking. I'm a big believer on the positive thinking. I told you about the quote that I really liked at the beginning of our chapter. The effectiveness of behavioral therapy depends on the technique used, and you can see that there are many techniques. Effectiveness has been studied extensively, and some techniques are highly effective. And there definitely is prevalent use today, especially in the mental health field. So, that is a little review of the Zastrow modules 1 and 2, so that you have that and you can use that for your quiz. All right, thank you.